Hey everybody, this is my thoughts on Killing Floor 2 as of September 6, 2015. It's currently in early access and they decided to have a free weekend of it, so that's why I tried it out. I will of course be picking up the full game eventually when it does come out, so that is something that you can look forward to. There will be a full review of that eventually. That said, as it stands right now, they've got most of the perks in, they've got 6 maps, they got a bunch of the weapons in, and it will give you a pretty good idea of how the game is going to progress from there. There have been accusations of the developers, which are Tripwire Interactive, being rather slow on the updates, but I think that that can be put aside because they do actually continually put out updates, and they do put out pretty significant updates that fill in content, and obviously there's no cost for that. Tripwire has never really done paid DLCs unless it's like a full-on expansion pack, example being Rising Storm for Red Orchestra 2. But anyway, this went into early access earlier this year, and it has made a fairly significant amount of progress since it got stuck into early access, so it is apparently doing its job. Now, as far as the game itself goes, let's first talk about the presentation. This game is on Unreal Engine 3, and it's a pretty heavily modified Unreal Engine 3, because they have some insanely good gore effects. Enemies will just get blasted to bits. I mean, big chunks will fly off of them. You can blow their head apart in numerous different ways. It reminds me a lot of the Soldier of Fortune 2, actually. Only it's more intense on the gore side of things because they have things like NVIDIA Flex thrown in there, where if you have a graphics card that's strong enough to support it, which would basically be a GTX 970 or a 980 or something better than that, then you can enable this feature and have the fluids that are spewing forth from a Zed's orifice, or intestines and all sorts of things like that, flying all over the place, interacting with the world as physics objects. So eventually you'll have things like the intestines will be hanging from the ceiling and all sorts of things like that. And they also have a robust decal system to where the decals don't actually go away. So when you go back through the levels, the carnage that you cause by just blasting a bunch of Zeds to bits, and particularly if you, for example, threw a grenade at them, is going to still be there for the remainder of the map itself. So that's actually a really cool feature, and it just lends a lot of awesomeness to this game, because it's one thing just to have a bunch of blood and guts spraying everywhere. It's another thing to have it feel like you've gone through this level and you've just completely wrecked the place. And that's exactly what you get here. Now, they could go a bit further with that and make it also be with regards to environmental objects other than just lights, because you can actually destroy lights in this thing, and it will bathe all of the areas in darkness. So that is something you do need to keep in mind when you're actually playing the game. But it could be done a bit more like, say, Fear, where they could just have these cool decals on the walls where it blow chunks out of the walls and things like that. They do have that to some degree. They have, especially with glass, but they don't have it with quite everything yet. And if they could implement that in some way, then that would be really awesome as well. Just to make the game feel like you're just causing a massive amount of carnage, even more than it already does, which it does a fantastic job of. As far as the visual quality itself goes, however, it's just leaps and bounds above the original Killing Floor, because, I mean, you go from Unreal Engine 2 to Unreal Engine 3, and so already that's a huge jump. And they have done a fantastic job with the modeling, and especially the animations for the weapons. The character animations are still a bit clunky here and there, but I get the feeling that they'll be ironed out eventually. Or if they aren't ironed out, then it's not that big of a deal, because they're not horrible. But the first-person weapon animations are rendered with a ridiculous amount of detail. In fact, I believe they're rendered at 200 frames a second. And that way, when it goes into Z time, which is the slow-mo that you'll see it go into occasionally, it renders them in excruciating amounts of detail with just the tiniest thing rendered. So they did a fantastic job with that and making the weapons just feel awesome when you fire them. And that goes together with, of course, the gore system and the sound design. So what you got in terms of visual quality is just a pretty solid thing. I mean, it's got some pretty good texture work. It's got some pretty good modeling. The animations are fantastic in the first-person stuff. In the third-person stuff, it's just decent enough. And the environments are all very well rendered and full of detail. But where it really kicks off is things like the sound design mixing together with the visual stuff. Because the sound design in this game is absolutely fantastic as well. For example, weapon fire is ridiculously beefy. I mean, you fire a shotgun, it sounds like a friggin' shotgun. It sounds like a cannon. And when you fire a shotgun in this game, you know it's going to wreck something. And it just feels fantastic when it does. And that extends to pretty much all of the weapons, really. I mean, there isn't really a weapon in this thing that doesn't feel powerful when you're using it, other than just what effect it actually has in-game. For example, I had a few issues with the grenade pistol that they just implemented, but I think that was more from me playing it on Hell on Earth difficulty than the weapon itself. It still felt powerful when I was using it, but it just didn't have that desired effect. So that's something to keep in mind. But apart from mild discrepancies like that, you're going to find that all of the sound effects in this thing are just great. I mean, from the weapon sounds to the almost sickening gore sounds to the Zeds themselves making all sorts of crazy noises, and it just lending a lot of atmosphere to the game. It all just works really well. And then you've got the voice acting, which, like the original game, is cheesy as hell and very much welcome. And they also expanded the cast of characters to not just being British people. So now you've got, for example, a French woman running around. She's a punk, basically. And she's just screaming things in French and with this really thick French accent. So that's pretty amusing. And they've got other characters in there as well that they're expanding. They haven't quite implemented everything yet, so I expect the cast of characters to get more diverse as the game goes on. But it's nice to have a bit more diversity than they had in the original game, and the voice acting itself is just corny and wonderful. And that also extends to the boss enemies, because there are boss enemies in this game now, and they have voice acting for at least one of them. The only one I've encountered is Hans, I believe is his name, and he is ridiculously over the top, and it's fantastic. So they've done a fantastic job with the sound design in general, and just the presentation itself lends a lot to this game. But then you get to the actual gameplay, because there's really not any story to this thing. It's just you go in, you kill a bunch of Zeds, and you just go through a bunch of waves. So there's not really much in the way of story there, but as far as the gameplay goes, it's pretty much just killing floor with some new bells and whistles and some tweaks to the way things work. So if you've played that game, then you're going to find this is very familiar. It's just an improvement in most regards. Like I said, the weapon handling in this thing is absolutely fantastic, so right off the bat, they did something really right there. And as far as being just a fairly standard zombie wave-based FPS, it's really just leaps and bounds ahead of the competition for the most part. I mean, its only real competition is the original Killing Floor, and the original Killing Floor is basically the premier zombie wave-based FPS, so they already are just improving upon what they did there. At any rate, it's a pretty simple game. You go in, you pick a perk which has a bunch of different bonuses and works better with certain weapons than others, and you go into the game, you fight off a bunch of waves of the Zeds as they come in. There's a bunch of different kinds of Zeds, from the fairly basic ones that are called clots all the way up to things like the flesh pound and so on and so forth. And you go through all of the waves, and let's just say, for example, you go through 7 waves, and then you will have a boss fight, which is a wave in and of itself. And the boss fight is a particularly tough enemy, and it's not uncommon for you to lose the entire party by doing that. So you will find that some coordination is a good thing on the boss round. Now, on the higher difficulty settings, you're going to need a lot more coordination in general because the difficulty just ratchets up to a ridiculous degree, to the point where it's actually pretty much unfair. So, what you're going to find there is that normal difficulty is almost too easy. I mean, I can solo normal difficulty without really any trouble, but if you go in to online play, the more players you have, the more Zeds you're going to run into, and the harder the game gets. So, that is something to keep in mind, and this thing really is best played with a full party of 6 players. So, if you have a bunch of buddies that you can get together to play this thing, then that's going to be particularly beneficial to you. That said, there are some pretty severe issues that this thing has, and they're almost exclusively related to the way the perks are set up and the way that the unlock system works. Now, when you're actually in-game, you don't have a sort of level-based unlock system for weapons. What you have instead is Dosh. Dosh is just the currency in this thing, and as you kill Zeds, you will get more and more of this currency, and you'll be able to spend that on upgrading your gear by purchasing armor, grenades, ammunition for your weapons if you actually require ammunition, because if you're playing the Berserker, you don't really need ammunition because all your weapons are melee. But apart from that, you're going to be buying weapons, ammo, grenades, things like that. And the weapons themselves are very, very expensive. Now, you will find that you don't really get very much money throughout this game, so it might take you a couple of waves to actually be able to unlock any of the good weapons for your perk. So that is something to keep in mind, and it's actually something that kind of irritates me compared to the original Killing Floor, because the original Killing Floor didn't really have that problem as much. You got more money for killing the Zeds, and thus you were able to get more powerful weapons pretty quickly. In this one, it's not uncommon for me to not have enough money to actually be able to purchase even the basic upgrade to whatever weapon you start with. For example, if you're playing as the support class, it's the double-barreled shotgun. If you're playing as the commando, you go from the varmint rifle to the L86. And the L86 is leaps and bounds better than that stupid, horribly pathetic varmint rifle. So you're going to want to get to that as soon as possible, and it might still take you a couple of rounds to be able to do that. So that's actually really irritating. They probably should buff up the amount of money that you get. Maybe not necessarily a huge amount, but enough to where you can at least upgrade to the first upgrade weapon fairly quickly. Now, it's easier for certain classes than it is for others. Berserker and Field Medic in particular, it's insanely easy for them to get upgraded weapons, because a Berserker can just run into a crowd of Zeds and start just hammering the attack button and just slice them to ribbons, whereas the Field Medic doesn't really need to worry too much about killing Zeds, as they can just heal people. So right now the game is kind of biased toward the Berserker of all things compared to every other perk. Now, you can of course play as the other perks, but in particular the Commando feels insanely underpowered right now. Now, that could just be because the Varmint Rifle is that bad, and it takes that long to actually be able to get any of their better weapons. But still, it feels like that class is just kind of cordoned off at this moment, because barely anyone except for new players wants to play as a Commando, and you don't even really get to unlock any good abilities for the Commando until basically the second tier of upgrades. Now, this is where I have the biggest beef with Killing Floor 2. The leveling system is awful. And the simple reason for that is you barely get any experience points for finishing a game. To give you an example, it took me 3 games on normal difficulty as a solo player to be able to level up Commando once. To go from level 0 to level 1, it took me 3 games, full games, beating the boss and everything, on normal difficulty. That's, of course, playing by myself. You do get more experience by playing as a group, but that's only because there are more Zeds. Now, it's worth noting that it's insanely easy for the Field Medic to level up, because all they have to do is heal people. That's easy to do. You just kind of point at them and you hit the heal thing, and it works, and you get experience points for that. But for everyone else, you're going to have to kill Zeds in a certain way, or you're going to have to complete certain other things. For example, the support, all they have to do is use support weapons, which are basically shotguns, and they can weld doors, which is something that you do pretty commonly. A commando has to kill things using commando weapons, which are assault rifles, and their big bonus for experience is to kill stalkers with commando weapons. Stalkers are pretty rare, so you're going to find that leveling up commando in particular is a lot harder than leveling up the others. Now here's the problem with that. Since it takes so long to level up, you don't get to see any of the upgrade tiers until fairly late into your game time. Now these upgrade tiers are not insignificant. I mean, with the commando, the first tier of upgrades includes a bonus that will actually give you 50% increased magazine capacity. So that's a huge thing right there, and you're gonna want that, but you need to level up to level 5 with the perk to be able to do that. Oh, and you level up each perk individually. It takes forever. And this goes for every single one of these perks. You're going to take forever to level these things up. And since you only get new upgrade tiers every 5 levels, it feels like the progression is just achingly slow, and you really do need those bonuses on the higher difficulty settings. Because if you're playing on the higher difficulty settings, you're going to get more experience points, so you're going to want to play on those. But then if you're trying to play them as a low-level character, you're just screwed, because you don't have the bonuses that will really help you out there. And you need every advantage you can get on those higher difficulties, because you're dealing with hundreds of Zeds, even in the first wave. So that's something they really need to sort out, because it takes friggin' forever to level up, and it just becomes a grind, and it feels like a grind. It's not like Killing Floor 1, where it did have a level system, but it gave you some very incremental passive bonuses that didn't really affect the gameplay all that much. Now, the level system is very important if you're going to play it on a higher difficulty setting. And the problem with that is that it just feels like you're grinding constantly in order to be able to get to that point. And then when you hit that point, it's just more grinding. So it gets incredibly tedious, and I really wish that they had sorted out the leveling system before the early access free weekend thing came along. Because I get the feeling that that's going to put a lot of people off. Because they're going to feel like, oh, well, this game is really grindy. Why would I play this? And so on and so forth. Now, that's not to say that the gameplay is bad. In fact, the gameplay is pretty good for what it is. I mean, it's a very simplistic first-person shooter, don't get me wrong. But so was the original Killing Floor, and I really like the original Killing Floor. This is basically the premier zombie-slaying co-op game experience. And Killing Floor 2 provides more of that, and more of it in a better context. Like I said, the weapon handling in this thing is fantastic. So they haven't quite implemented everything yet. They haven't implemented the sharpshooter perk yet, so they don't have things like sniper rifles or revolvers or anything like that. They only have the basic 9mm pistol. But the sheer attention to detail they've thrown in there, things like if you run out of ammo with only one of your pistols, if you're dual wielding pistols, and you still have another round in the other pistol, it will actually only rack the slide on the pistol that you don't have ammo in. So that's really nice. And things like the aiming down the sights when you're doing the pistols now, instead of doing it the way that Killing Floor 1 did it, where it just kind of zoomed in this one you actually aim down the sights of your right-hand pistol. So that's actually another really nice thing, because now you can actually see what you're aiming at. And it just feels really great when you're shooting Zeds in this game. It feels fantastic to go into melee, because the sheer amount of evisceration you cause is just glorious. But they really do need to sort out that leveling system. It's too slow. Now, I don't have any real issues with it being a bit slow, particularly if you get to the higher tiers. I mean, I would expect it to get slower the more you level up, but starting out painfully slow, where it took me 3 friggin' games to level up once, don't do that. That's just tedious. So that's really my only major gripe with Killing Floor 2 right now, other than the fact that it's just not finished. So I will let you guys know how it is when the full game comes out, when I do eventually get a copy of it. But as it stands right now, it's shaping up nicely, but they do have a few things they need to sort out. They do have some content they need to add. So we'll just have to stay tuned on that. But the foundation is great. And this is some of the best weapon handling I have ever seen in FPS history. So there is that. Thanks for watching.